Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Sharpen Customer Experience with GIS. My name is Yvonne Lin and I'll be the host of today's webinar. This webinar is a part of the 2019 GeoConnect series. This webinar will be recorded and the link will be provided next week. And now let's go over some housekeeping logistics. There's a control panel on your screen. You'll be able to ask questions at any time. We'll be keeping tabs on your questions and we'll circle around and answer these questions at the end of the webinar. If for some reason we cannot get to your question, we will be sure to answer them offline. Again, my name is Yvonne Lin, a Industry Solutions Coordinator. Joining me today is Pat Hull, Electric Specialist. Pat was the Assistant General Manager for a utility in the Southwest. Bill Meehan, Director of Electric Utility Solutions. Bill was the Vice President of Electric Operations for an investor-owned utility in northeastern part of the U.S. Both Bill and Pat were pioneers in the use of GIS for utility operations. And lastly, Tyler Pilarczyk, a utility solutions engineer. He has been developing prototypes and inspiring the team on how GIS can transform utility work. So let's take a moment to thank our speakers for being here today. And I'm going to turn over the webinar to Bill as he walks us through today's agenda.
Thanks, Yvonne. If I were to ask everyone what word comes to mind when we think of GIS, I bet it would be maps. Certainly maps are fundamental to GIS, but I bet that few would say discovery. GIS is about finding out something new or insightful that you hadn't thought about before. Today, this webinar is about using GIS to discover insights about customers for two reasons. One, to improve customer engagement, and two, to provide a better way for your customers to engage with you. Engagement and feedback improves customer satisfaction, a key performance indicator of every utility. So today we'll discuss trends in customer experience and what's GIS got to do with it? Understanding, which is really about knowing your customers. Two, analysis, getting insight about your customers. And three, engagement. What do we do and how do we help customers engage with us? And then finally, we'll have a question and answer period. So all of us, including me, have had some memorable customer experiences. But before we get started, Pat, share a particularly rocky one.
Bill, a number of years ago when I ran electric operations, staff came to me with an emergency. They wanted to call the police to deal with an irate customer who had put herself in danger. She had brought our tree trimming to a grinding halt. Here's what happened. The tree crew was completely shut down by a woman who stood under a tree and simply refused to leave. She was very concerned. She lived a couple of streets away, and she always liked to walk on this beautiful tree-lined street. And as she did, she kept an eye on a bird's nest that had some hatchlings in it. And on this particular morning, when she walked around the corner, the street was closed, there were chainsaws running, the chipper was very loud, and she was very worried about those birds. She was worried sick that they would be harmed. You see, we notified customers on the street, but because she lived a few streets over, she did not get notified. So she didn't have a good way to know where we would be trimming or how to get answers to her questions. She put herself in harm's way to save those birds. How about you, Bill?
Boy, I've had my share of rocky customer experiences, but the most memorable is the time that I ruined a wedding. Well, not me personally, but so here's what happened. My crews had a job to install some conduits in the street. So naturally, we had to jackhammer the pavement. The work was scheduled on overtime on Saturday. The work was right outside a church. At the exact time that the organ player began the wedding march, our crews began to jackhammer the street. I got a nasty letter from the mother of the bride, and here's what she wrote to me. In the video of her beautiful daughter walking down the aisle, all anyone could hear was the sound of jackhammering, drowning out the wedding march, and of course, much of the service. She further noted that you simply cannot reschedule a wedding. Well, the work was important, yet there must have been a way to better communicate to the community that we're going to do work in the area. If we had known about the wedding, we could have postponed the work, even for a couple of hours. Also, in Pat's case, we could have figured out a better way to tell the community about our plans. Of course, you can never reschedule a wedding. Tyler, any ideas about how we could have avoided these customer experience disasters? Tyler?
Sure, Bill. So we're already seeing utilities today leverage ArcGIS to do just that. So here we're looking at a web page, part of Peoples Gas's website, that's dedicated to informing their customers of any current and future projects. And as you navigate the page, you'll run into a web map here that you're able to navigate. In this case, I'll zoom in here. And thanks to our legend here to the left, we can see which projects are ready for construction, which ones are in progress, and which ones have been completed. And of course, if you're interested in a particular one, you can click it on the map, open a pop-up, and it'll tell you its status. So Bill, this is already being done today by some of our utilities.
Well, Tyler, if I had had the ability to have real-time, up-to-the-minute information of work in an area like construction, tree trimming, maintenance, or anything that could have caused customer concern, and not just outages, because frankly, I think utilities do a very good job of communicating planned outages. But if we could have communicated that, we could have directed people to our website, we could have done more spatial analysis so that, like in Pat's case, even though the person didn't live on the street, they could have analyzed who could have been impacted in another area. What if someone was having a grand opening of an ice cream shop, or having a special sale? We could have done a little targeted social media to get people to know our plans. So these examples show how GIS could have done a significant positive impact on customer satisfaction. We wonder how much your companies use GIS for sharpening customer experiences. So we have a poll for you. We believe that utilities use GIS for a lot of things, but we'd like to know just how much your companies are using GIS directly for customer enrichment, customer engagement, customer experiences. So please pick one of these answers. Are you using GIS for customer engagement? Just pick one. So the four choices, of course, none at all. And low, that might be mapping some assets to serve customers. Medium would be some kind of public-facing map, like maybe an outage map or something. Or high, using analytics, demographics, or social media integration. So submit your answers, and we'll give you a few minutes to vote. Wow, let's see here. So really only 7% of you are using the full power of GIS to do some real analytics. And we're going to talk about that a lot over the course of this seminar. It's kind of even, it's surprising. 28% people don't even use GIS for anything to do with customer. What do you think, Pat? What's your feeling on this?
I'm glad to see this level of usage, but I do see some room here to apply some new ideas and some tools. And I think the audience is going to really like the things that we have for them today. So let's dig a little deeper into the customer experience and the role of GIS there. Utilities have historically been in the asset business, but today the industry is moving from being less asset-centric and being more customer-centric. We're under a lot of pressure to meet increasing customer expectations, and you see that reflected in utilities' mission statements, in their corporate values, and even in their corporate strategy goals. Customers expect them to know us better and to give them a better experience. So what that means is that literally every business decision we make has to be made with the customer in mind, and the customer at, as they say, top of mind for the utility. We need to think about everything that we do and ask ourselves, how will this affect the customer experience? Now, Bill, you and I are engineers. We've worked with a lot of technical people over the years. This is something that technical people struggle with. I've had a lot of people ask me, how does my protection scheme, my purchase specification really impact customers? But everything that the utility does impacts customers in a unique way. And like I said, we've been focused largely on assets for a long time, and you hear it in the way that we talk. We talk about meters as cash registers, and we oftentimes refer to our customers as ratepayers. And there have been a lot of changes in the utility business. These are just a few on the screen, but these trends all affect customers in new ways. For example, we've seen increased competition for revenue from renewables. And regulators are giving customers more choices. That affects our engagement with them. Customers, residential, commercial, and industrial, have all grown used to companies using data to understand them better and then personalize their offerings and their communications with the customers. And utilities are comparing themselves now to other businesses and other service providers, like Amazon Prime, my favorite example. Amazon knows that I need to order more vitamins before my wife realizes we need to order more vitamins. And then they tell me when those vitamins are 2 stops away from being set right next to my front door. So utilities are asking, how can we keep our customers happy and preserve our business model? The way people work today is changing. Network operators need real-time information. They get that from IoT sensors, but they also get that from their field crews who have mobile applications. But customers use mobile applications and are used to getting their information from an app or a website. People have much greater access to information on social media, as we know, because I've seen things go bad in a hurry on Facebook over a big outage. So where does GIS come in? One thing that really makes Esri stand out is this idea of a complete GIS. ArcGIS is a complete information system, complete in that it includes many additional functions beyond traditional mapping. We like to think of it as 3 capabilities or systems that work seamlessly together: a system of record, a system of insight, and then also one for engagement. And most agencies start using GIS to keep track of their spatial data, the system of record. But ArcGIS goes a little bit further. The development over the last couple of decades has expanded dramatically into other areas that go directly to supporting customer engagement. Esri poured research and development into an incredible system of insight to understand what that data means, analysis, and even state-of-the-art data science tools like machine learning. The customer is then touched directly by tools in the system of engagement that uses mobile and web features to get the data and the insights to more people that need it. So that supports all of the key strategic initiatives that we've listed across the top of the screen. That includes safety, asset management, grid or network modernization, and gas and innovation, and where we'll spend our time today looking at customer engagement. Well, there's really 3 elements to customer engagement or improving the customer experience. That is quite simple. The first one is understanding. We have to understand our customers, and this is really finding out as much as you possibly can about the customers, who they are, what they like, what they don't like, their behaviors, their history of interactions with the utility, maybe even things that we have done to them, like ruining their weddings. They really are more than just a meter. They're all unique people. With great data, then we can use spatial analysis for greater insight into the cause and effect of our relationship with the customer and answer questions like, what influences their perception of value from the utility? And then finally, rather than using a simple one-size-fits-all approach to customer engagement, we can pay attention to particular customers and focus what we do on specific customers. So let's take these concepts one at a time. The first one is understanding. Utilities have a ton of information about the customers. The problem is that that data is often spread all over the company. It's in SCADA, it's in the CIS system, it's in our surveys, it's even in Twitter feeds. We also know a lot about our operations. Think about reliability. On the electric side, we have SAIDI and SAIFI, which are average measures for the whole utility that measure the duration and the frequency of outages for the average customer. But the problem with those stats is that they're averages. With GIS, we can dig in deeper to those average numbers and find out exactly where we've been having persistent problems and see which customers are most affected. ArcGIS provides a way to bring this data all together in one place and then turn it into colorful pictures and visualize it in ways that people understand. Where are the customers unhappy? Where did we trim trees? Where are we changing meters or digging up the street? Just looking at that data in one place begins to provide a solid understanding of customer experiences. Tyler, are you ready to show us how some of that works?
Sure thing, Pat. Thanks. So I think one way we can really begin to learn about our customers is to understand how they engaged with us. So right now we're looking at a map of all of our customers within the Truckee area. But I think the traditional way customers would express their dissatisfaction with their utility would be through customer surveys. Now that may be web form, before it may have been mail-ins or phone surveys that were conducted that would express a customer's concern about a particular part about their utility. Now, typically though, we don't really look at that data from a spatial perspective. We're used to seeing it in something like this, a table that tells us some customer information, the address, and the particular topic or category that they were maybe complaining about. Now, even though we may not look at this as a spatial data set, it does include spatial data in there, like the address information here at the top. So if I turn back to my original map, and we use those addresses and geocode those within our map, we can start to see how these customer complaints relate to our entire customer footprint here. And that's what we see there in the yellow pins are those customer surveys. Now on the note of surveys, another way to conduct surveys and gather information from customers is through the ArcGIS survey app we call Survey 123. Now without any kind of development required, we can configure these surveys to ask questions like, or to allow customers to report streetlight issues. So from here, we provided some predefined options for the customer to tell us what's the problem. Is it not on? Is it cycling too much? Is it remaining all the time? Is it broken? And once they make that selection, they can provide a description like streetlight hasn't been on for a few weeks now and we're starting to get a little uncomfortable. Scrolling down, they can of course put a pin on the map where the streetlight is located. If they have a picture, great, go ahead and attach it to the survey. And if they want to be updated on the status, they just select yes, provide their contact information as well as their contact preference. Now, as soon as that survey is submitted, since this is an app, a part of our whole GIS system, I can turn back to my dashboard here and pull in those streetlight surveys. And as soon as a new survey is submitted, I can pull up the pop-up information here, read what's been recorded, and if they attached a picture, I can go ahead and take a look at that. Now, probably the most popular way customers express their frustration with their utilities is like what Pat mentioned, through social media. And social media is not, again, something we may not look at as a spatial system, but it does include a spatial element. If someone posts a tweet, there's a location tied to that tweet. They've tweeted it from a specific location. So just like what we did with the table, we're going to take that element and use it to populate our map with tweets. And if I select this one here, we can then pull in information from that tweet like the username, the handle, the time the tweet was made, and then using natural language processing, we can understand that they're talking about our utility, and in this case, they're talking about streetlight repairs. And just like what we did for our original attachment, we can then take a look at the original tweet and see, okay, it's from a pretty serious customer here, very important customer. We're definitely going to need to address this. So now that we've taken all these different ways customers are engaging with us, I'm going to remove our customer points, and I'm going to use our bar chart here at the bottom to filter out all the ones, so we're only looking at those that are related to our network performance. So these are the complaints we've received with complaints about performance. Now, just by being able to visualize on the map, we can start to point out clusters of those complaints in certain areas across our service territory. So at every lead, you can start to ask, how come we're seeing more complaints about our grid's performance in these areas and not in other areas? So Bill, now that we pulled in all this information, how does this compare with kind of the work that you've done at the utility?
Well, this is great. And part of the problem that we had at the utility, and I think this is true of many other companies, is you have a lot of data. And you have a lot of data in a lot of different places. We used to, as you talked about, do surveys, the J.D. Power's customer satisfaction survey. Well, we'd get a report, but basically it would sort of say, well, you need to improve in this area or this area or this area. But we never really were able to put it together in one place. So let's say the thing about tree trimming or the ruined weddings or all of these bad things. What if we were to take those letters that we got and all of this kind of data about what customers thought and put it together in one place? Aha! Then add social media. So that means that you are talking to me in a particular place. Now we can see it. And even though we haven't, and we're going to talk about this a bit later about analytics, just seeing it on a map is extraordinarily powerful. You make those connections. There's a cluster here, a cluster there. We were never able to do anything like that. All we had was reports, and frankly, very few people even thought about using a map to be able to describe that. What do you think, Pat?
My experience was similar, Bill. We had a customer satisfaction survey report, and it was usually a number, and it was good news or it was not very good news. We didn't really have any way to integrate that into our decision making. We didn't really have a way to figure out how to adjust what it was that we were doing in order to improve our customer satisfaction. Like you said, utilities have a lot of data, complaints, operations, billing, and in our quest to improve customer engagement, we saw that many different types of data can give us a more complete view of the customer. And that's really key because in many industries, they're talking today about this idea of customer 360, looking at the entire universe of things related to the customer, a complete view from all of the different utility touch points, all the things that affect their experience with the utility. So that brings up the next subject, which is analysis. Bill, how do you think analysis fits in?
Well, I used to hear an expression that the more information you have, the better. In other words, the more information you have about anything that you want to improve or sharpen customer experience, the better. And we talked about bringing in lots of data. And I think from a visualization perspective, that's excellent. But then we want to go one step further and talk about analytics or analysis. And so with a solid grasp of the data and the more data that you get, we get fresh insight from analysis, particularly what we like to call spatial analysis, looking at things that, how does one thing relate to another? Where have I really done something bad? One of the most powerful tools is correlation, correlating one thing to something else. You may think has no relationship, but you may discover that it does. The problem is a lot of what we do is based on a gut feel in some ways. By having solid data, understanding your customers, and then building on it with some science about analytics, we can get additional insight. In fact, insight that may surprise you. And sometimes you may find out things that no one else would know. And we like to use the term, see what others can't. And this notion of analytics, of analysis, allows you to say, aha, this is really something I had never thought about. Because why? Because eventually we're going to make decisions on that analysis. And if we make the wrong decision, we don't do the analysis, or we use gut feel, oftentimes we can make really bad decisions about customer experience, about investment, about making programs, and all of that. So Tyler, can you take us through some of the sort of advanced analysis and analytics?
Sure, thanks, Bill. So I'm going to go back to our original example from earlier, and we're going to still look at those complaints that are around the grid's performance. And I want to walk us through an analysis we performed to figure out why people are making the complaints that they are in the areas that they are. So in this case, I'm going to overlay a layer here. This case is going to be of our circuit symbolized by our load to see if there's any correlation between those complaints and our grid here. So right away, I do see kind of an example here where we do have a lot of tweets or complaints around that particular circuit that's having a lot of demand. So there is possible that we're seeing a lot of power quality issues in this area and our customers aren't happy about it. It's also interesting though, as I see this other cluster that happens to be in a circuit that does not have the same demand as our busier areas. So to help us kind of shed some more light on that, I'm going to bring in a different layer, this time showing the locations of our significant outages. And right away, I see a much greater correlation between where we've had outages and where we've had people complain about our network. So we always want to minimize the number of outages that we have. But one thing we probably could improve is how we communicate with these customers to inform them of planned outages, or when there is an unexpected outage, how to inform those customers right away and let them know that we're working on it and that we expect to resolve it in a matter of time. The next example, I want to now look at all those complaints related to street light repairs. And this one's kind of interesting because we realize that this very well may not be related to something that the utility is doing. So when we thought about what can correlate with these complaints here, we brought in our crime layer from Esri's Living Atlas that shows where we have higher and lower amounts of crime. And sure enough, there's a huge clustering of complaints right in that red area. So even if the condition of these streetlights are essentially the same across our entire service territory, the people within high crime areas may be more sensitive to their streetlights working. So if there's a down line or a down light rather, they're going to notify us probably a lot more frequently than someone else in a lower crime area. Now the next complaint, and the last complaint I want to look at is in regards to billing. And now naturally, we don't see a heavy correlation with billing and crime, which is to be expected. I'm going to bring in income and see if there's anything that can tell us. So when I bring that in, I'm also not really seeing a very dominant relationship or correlation. I do see a lot in the yellow area, so in the kind of the middle of our income spectrum, but definitely not any in the low incomes area. So as we're trying to figure out what could be causing a lot of these complaints, we want to bring in even more demographic information. So instead, we leveraged our Tapestry segmentation data. Now this is something Esri's demographers work on by using a ton of different demographics and then classifying each unique or providing a unique neighborhood classification for each of these blocks. So if I were to click this red block that tends to have a ton of complaints here, I can pull up my pop-up and I see that the dominant Tapestry segment is in style. So from that pop-up, I can open up the poster of that Tapestry segment, and I'm provided some standard demographic information like the average household size, the median age, and the median household income. Now what's very interesting are these socioeconomic traits down here. That's going to tell me things like how many folks here have a college education, what's the employment rate. They even get into behavior traits like these folks are connected and knowledgeable, they carry smartphones wherever they go. In our case, this one's especially interesting, the last one here, is that they're attentive to price. So they're always using coupons, always finding a way to save money. So knowing that, I'm going to turn back to my map, and it's very possible that our meters may be working correctly, our billing system may be just fine. It could be because these folks are trying to save as much money as they can, so if their bill is incorrect, they're going to be calling in, they're going to be complaining about it. And they may also be interested in some incentive programs that help them save even more money. And now up to this point, we've gathered a lot of information from different sources, and then we've even overlaid additional information to start to pull out some insights. So our analysis in this case was more of a visual analysis, but of course we have tools to automate this entire process for us. So from here, we use a tool that breaks down the types of complaints and then determines the dominant variable that has the highest correlation. So for our grid performance, sure enough, outages had the highest correlation. And then with our billing, that Tapestry segment that we saw before had the highest correlation as well. So now that we've brought in all this data and start to analyze it and pull out some trends, what are some of your thoughts here, Bill?
Yeah, this is really fantastic because what if you really wanted to improve customer satisfaction? That's your goal, right? It's a KPI, key performance indicator, and every utility, especially investor-owned utilities that depend on, reputation, they want to improve customer satisfaction. What better way to do that would be to take a look at that Tapestry segmentation. I love that. We make an assumption that, well, these people, everybody sort of thinks the same. What if we could reach out to those people who really value incentives and we did something focused and targeted right in that area? Wow, wouldn't that improve customer satisfaction? Or conversely, what if we looked at people who are really, really environmentally conscious, a different segment? Instead, we're going to go in there with our chainsaws blazing away and cut down and trim all the trees without any regard to what people even think or feel, like what Pat's little example in the beginning. But then we'd really know what this really means. What is the analytics telling us? I mean, this is how people kind of think about voters and voter perceptions. It's the same technology, and we use that. And I think that this whole notion of an analysis provides some exactly new things, new thinking about how we could run our operations, gaining insight into what would impact customers. Here's my favorite: correlate customer statistics with things we did to really maybe make them unhappy. Visualize trends and patterns. And before I get to the future thing, the one area that I thought was so interesting was this correlation between crime and streetlights. Well, I work for Pat. You and I work for utility. We have nothing. We have no control over crime, right? None whatsoever. And yet, how would we even get those? Where would we get those crime statistics? Get it from the police, public safety, available websites. We can take that data and consume it through the ArcGIS platform easily. Once we do that, now we can say, is there a correlation to what people think and customer engagement with safety? So it's really terrific. But analysis is not enough. We must take and do something. Once we've got all this stuff, now it's about focusing our efforts to improve customer satisfaction by putting in the right programs and the right plans. And Pat, take us to the next step here.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, this is really the best part. Once we figure out where, what, and why about the customer interactions, then, like you said, we can target our engagement with them and add value in ways that are meaningful to every customer. And we understand that people want different things from their utilities. Some have very specific desires, as you pointed out, maybe environmental concerns, but others are quite content not to hear from us very often at all. I want to take a moment to talk about these demographic tapestry segments. These are really fascinating. There are 68 different market segments and characteristics that provide a view of US consumers. And you see them there on the screen. Of course, you can't read that, but it gives you a flavor of the diversity here. And I would encourage you to look at this. It's available on the Esri website to look at. I want to talk about two of my favorites. The first one, you're going to love this name, is called Laptops and Lattes. I even told my wife about it last night, and she loved that one. These are single, well-educated professionals, often living in urban environments, and they're very likely to want progressive programs around renewables. These might be great candidates for a community solar effort. Another one of my favorites is called Rust Belt Traditions, a mix of married couples, singles, and families, often living in older neighborhoods. And similar to what Tyler showed, these folks are focused on cost and reliability. So our goal is to engage the customer in a two-way conversation to move beyond, like you said, Bill, working from our own individual assumptions and our experience, and move into a dynamic learning where we're constantly listening to the data and improving our customer engagement based on what the data tells us. Imagine a customer checks the utility self-service portal, and before they even do anything, they get a little pop-up message that says, "Are you calling about the street light on your street that is out?" That would be awesome, right? What if it then said the technician is scheduled to arrive to repair that light in 22 minutes, just like Amazon tells me that my vitamins are 2 stops away on my street? Wow, that would really improve your JD Powers score, Bill, wouldn't it? Tyler, some utilities are already doing things like this. I would love if you could just take a minute and show us a few.
I can. So we've already taken a look at an example before with People's Gas and how they're using a web map to be able to communicate with their customers about their active and future projects. But of course, there's different applications we've seen in the industry to support their customer experience. So the first example around customer connections, this map was actually made to make sure that anyone that would be part of a planned outage would be notified of that. And what the map's really doing is actually pointing out quality issues with the data. So it's meant to help an analyst see those addresses there on the left, circle in red, that should be classified in a purple zone. And then they have to figure out, okay, well, it's surrounded by a green zone. Do we need to just incorporate it into the green zone? Or did we locate these addresses incorrectly and they actually have to be moved to the right side of the map? We've even seen a lot of work around customer load profiling. So understanding where the network is, where demand for the network is coming from and by who over the course of a day. And of course, there's that spatial element we can begin to see that from a spatial perspective. A very popular use case is publishing a customer outage map. So this would be integrated with an outage management system, which would allow a customer to immediately know where an outage has occurred, how many people have been impacted, and when those folks can expect a resolution to that outage. Now, what's also starting to emerge are hosting capacity maps. So this would, in a similar fashion to the outage map, be hosted publicly and shared with customers that are interested in distributed generation opportunities. And the last example we wanted to point out comes from a large utility out of the Czech Republic, where they've taken a traditional appraisal process that would take 30 days per request and launched this geo portal that automatically accepts or denies a project up to 30% of the time. And even for the rest of the 70%, they were able to streamline that process so significantly, they were able to save 84,000 workdays in the process. Now, these are great examples, and we certainly encourage the utilities we work with to continue the great work they're already doing. But I think there's one area that there's certainly room for growth, and there'll be a lot of opportunity in the near future, and that's with ArcGIS Hub. Now, Hub can act as the landing page or the destination for any customer to access any information provided by their utility. So if I'm a customer for our fictitious Westerville Power and Light utility, I can come here to find out information about outages, tree trimming schedules, EV charging stations, and so on. So once I'm on that page, I can scroll down. I see our outage map here. I can see how many customers have been impacted, the average time to restoration, and if I'm in that neighborhood and I'm sensing the power's out, I can see information regarding that particular outage. Now, of course, there's probably other information that they have available here. And in this case, they're actually providing me the opportunity to report my own outage or streetlight issue using Survey 123 forms like what we saw before. Scrolling on even more, I can find any other resources and maps that are made available to me, like those EV charging, electric vehicle charging stations, a map of distributed generation opportunities, and tree trimming schedules. Now with People's Gas, we can easily incorporate that construction map as well. Now, another interesting way to share information with your customers in a spatial way, but not maybe in the familiar sense, is through story maps. So this is a story map that Westerville has launched to explain to customers the work they're doing around conservation and environmental efforts to protect endangered species that have habitats near their power lines.
Feller, can I jump in here for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Avian protection is a very hot topic. It even relates a little bit to my story at the beginning here. And look at that bird of prey. What a fantastic image. I wonder what that bird is doing. And I also wonder how they got this picture. I think he's getting ready to attack the drone that's taking his picture. But if you notice where he is standing, he's standing on top of a wooden pole. And birds of prey love high places where they can keep an eye on the terrain. And they like to perch and nest on poles and on towers. This is really a very big issue for utilities because they are federally protected. And customers love this story map kind of engagement as a way to get information. So I'm sorry, but please go ahead and take us through it.
Yes, so this is a way of being able to communicate what's the work we're doing around protecting these endangered species. So we can see a map of the nests and other habitats that we've identified. And then scrolling in even further, we can start to outline specific areas that include habitats of protected species, which could then be shared across our field crews so they know that they need to be more sensitive and react accordingly in these particular areas. So certainly would have came in handy in your story there, Pat. Now going back to our hub, we can also include any other information within our web page, even if it's not like a web map or a web application. It could be live tweets coming from the utility or Esri in our case, or something like the Weather Channel to know the latest events going on Twitter. So when I see this as a customer of utility, I know my utility likely has an outage map that's available to me, but I would have never guessed that they would have tree trimming schedules and distributed generation. Now, it's out there, and there's probably dedicated web pages for that, but I can go to this one destination to access all of this information that's available to me, and as a customer, that would be extremely valuable. Now, this hub and the examples we've seen today would be great for our customers or for utility customers that are on the web, and that's obviously a large majority of them. But there's still a segment of customers that we need to find a better way to engage with them than some of these web efforts. So to help with that, I'm going to leverage one of our applications called Business Analyst, and this is really designed to allow me to leverage all the different demographic variables that Esri has made available in this tool, anything from population to income to spending behaviors. So in my case, I want to find all those people that do not really use internet. So any of these story maps and hubs we build, they would not really access them. So if I just type in kind of a search phrase here, I found a variable that gives me the number of people that says internet does not impact their life at all. So kind of looking in the Los Angeles area, we're going to see all the census tracts and how many people have responded yes to that question. Sure enough, there's still a lot of people, even in the LA area, that says internet doesn't really impact them. So now that we started to identify those communities, we're going to take it to the next level and start to compare it with other variables. So to do that, I'm going to create, instead of a color-coded map, I'm going to use a smart map search to incorporate more than just one variable. So here I have my sliders on the left, and the first one is with my first variable. I'm going to set it to only show me the tracks that have at least 750 people that have answered yes on that first question. And sure enough, that filtered a lot of our census tracts for us. Now the next variable we're going to look at are a percentage of households that subscribe to cable television. So they may not be on the internet as much, but they're definitely watching TV. So now we have these very precise pockets as we start to consider a TV advertisement campaign that we can focus those efforts in these pockets across the Los Angeles area. So I'm going to reset our filter. And now we're going to look at those that read at least one daily newspaper a day. So maybe for these folks in these areas, we can start to focus our newspaper advertisements or publish articles within newspapers that we know that they're going to be reading at a greater chance than on a website. And the last variable we have are looking at all the people who have attended a public meeting on either town or school issues. So these folks may want a more personal touch. So as we're talking about our conservation efforts, maybe there's an audience or a community where it makes sense to visit them and reach out to them in person. So kind of wrapping up the demos here, Pat, what's some of the interesting things you found, or what are some of your thoughts?
Well, I would say that is just packed. This whole idea of targeting our outreach to specific customers is it's a huge step forward in utility customer relations. It's a game changer. And I have to say that data-driven market segmentation is just amazing. Just last week, I was reading an article about Austin Energy and how they were using that very capability to find likely EV owners or people that were going to be likely to purchase EVs in the future, and then market to them their new electric vehicle charging rate. And it was so successful that they're now using that with all of their programs and services. And then you showed Hub. It's fantastic to be able to have so many things in one place and then incorporate that into a utility's website. It's a great way to incorporate a lot of information. And as you pointed out, it's discoverable, right? People might not think that there would be a construction activity map, but that's where they could find that. And then maybe even save some weddings. And then finally, Business Analyst, what a very powerful tool. I could see utilities making use of that to laser focus their activities and their programs. These are great ideas to pull out if you would find yourself in a corporate strategy session around how will we improve our customer engagement. Well, Bill, as we wrap up here, what are some closing thoughts you have?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So I love surprises, but I love them in my personal life, but I hated them when I was working for the power. What about you? You didn't like surprises, right? And you hate the idea of doing something and being surprised by the results. Earlier, I talked about creating future trends. or I was going to mention it. So if you do something and something happens and it's a surprise to you, then you're really not using data, you're not using analytics, and you're not using GIS to do that. And that kind of reminds me of what I said in the beginning. Remember I said when you think about GIS to think of, maybe everybody's going to say, well, I think of GIS, I think of the word maps. Well, really, we've talked about it all day. It's not about maps alone. It's about using maps for discovery. And that reminds me of a story. So when I meet with a customer, particularly senior manager customer, I ask 3 questions. The first question is, what's your biggest problem? Second question is, what are you doing about it? And the third question is, how do you know that what you're doing is actually solving your biggest problem? So I happened to meet with a senior manager and I asked her these questions. What's your biggest problem? And she said, customer satisfaction, which just so happened to be the subject of our session today. So then I said, the second question, what are you doing about it? Well, we're doing 3 things. We're doing increased tree trimming. We're stepping up our smart meter program, and we're sending our call center people to, I don't know, I would call it charm school, so that they can be more polite on the phone. So then I asked the final question is, how do you know that these 3 things are going to solve your biggest problem? And what she said was, I hope so. And I said, we hope so. Your job depends on it. Well, I said it in my head voice, but what I said was, have you thought about using GIS and all of the things associated with this session today to help you discover what is really going to be meaningful? And it's really using those 3 things we talked about: understanding, knowing your customers, get data, get lots of data, get it from all over the place. Analysis, don't just stop at getting data. Show, do the spatial analysis, get trends and correlations, and do all that sort of stuff. And then create targeted programs to go after those segments that Tyler showed, to really do what is your problem for the purpose of actually solving your biggest problem, which is customer satisfaction. So by using ArcGIS to sharpen customer experiences, you can change her conversation and your customer's conversation from "we hope so" to "we know so." Yvonne, back to you.
Thank you, Bill, for that closing story. Wow, I know we just blasted you with all this information, but I want to bring your attention to GeoConnects. We will be going to GeoConnects in Atlanta at the end of this month. It is the largest utility GIS conference in the world, and you don't want to miss out on Guadalupe Valley Electric in Texas who will be demonstrating their customer engagement work on the big stage. So we would love to meet you there and continue the conversation. Please stay engaged with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and GeoNet. We post a number of relevant content like articles, white papers, ebooks, and reminders for future utility-related events. So show us some love and follow our social channels. And before we wrap up this webinar, let's take some time to answer some questions. If you have any remaining questions, please send them in right now as we will be going through them. I see a number of questions coming in. The first on Tapestry Data. Tyler, do you think you can tell me more about Tapestry Data and where to find it?
Yeah, so thanks, Yvonne. I think that's a point worth clarifying. So a lot of the data that we saw today, outside of the outage and the circuit data, a lot of that was from Esri's Living Atlas, and that's really this inventory of all these different data layers, thousands of them, anything from demographics to live weather streams to different base maps, are all available to ArcGIS users. So we just tapped into that inventory of layers within the demonstration, and that kind of brings out another question a customer had was, could the GIS be integrated with wind maps so we can improve the prediction of power outages? And that's certainly a really good use case. And we have our own weather feeds that you can leverage to be able to see wind strength and direction and whatnot. Now, it doesn't have to be only Living Atlas. If you know a provider that provides that information in real time, we can find a way to integrate with that feed. So you can use our Living Atlas. That's where we got our Tapestry data from, or you can utilize some other web services.
Thank you, Tyler, for answering that question. I see another question here about Hub. How is Hub integrated with a website?
Yeah, I can take that one too. So what we saw today was ArcGIS Hub, which is an application off of ArcGIS Online. And that is our SaaS offering of our web portal. So when you deploy a hub, that's going to be hosted in our environment. Now, what I showed today was all configurable out of the box, kind of drag and drop templates. But you can, of course, embed your own HTML elements to really provide the branding of your website. Now, we also have an internal version for ArcGIS Enterprise called Sites, which really serves the same purpose, and you can customize in the same fashion as well. Now, just kind of going over some of these other questions that are coming in, there's a question around social media and really what's required to pull it in. That's an area that our partners have really taken off in, and being able to tap into the Twitter's API and using that spatial component when people are tagging their location in a tweet and using that to understand where tweets are being made. And then I mentioned that natural language processing on top of it to understand what they're actually tweeting about. So we have the underlying technology in the server technology to be able to read and pull in from different sensors, but our partners have really built on top of that to really tailor it for social media. And I wanted to address one more technical question while we have a little bit more time, and it's around business analyst and how you can get started. Today we saw business analyst as an application off of ArcGIS Online. Kind of like Hub, we also have our own version for an on-premise solution where you purchase the data and you perform that analysis in-house. We also have a desktop version that you can even go deeper into the analytical side. Now, regardless of how you decide to move forward, we do have a lot of training programs and ways to hold your hand through the deployment and the use of the application, whether it's kind of a light user or more advanced usage.
Thanks for that, Tyler. I see a question here. We use GIS in engineering and operations. How do we engage customer care? Well, first off, bonus points for using the word engage in this question. And that is a great question. It's really the what's next? So what do we do with this within the organization? And that's very typical that utilities have grown up using GIS in engineering and in operations. So how do we get the customer division on board with some of these capabilities? I would say the simplest thing to do would be, one, point them to our web page. We have a web page on our site around customer care where you'll find resources there. You will receive a link to the video of this webinar. If you're comfortable doing it, I would sit down with your counterpart in customer care in a conference room and watch this video with them, because they're going to have a lot of questions. They're not going to be familiar with the data that you have and some of the things that we've talked about here, and you could explain that. It's really about the data. If you could get to a point where you can determine what it is that they're most interested in, then as Tyler mentioned, you could set up some processes that could run these analytics and provide you feedback on that. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I would just add, I agree with Pat. I would add one thing. I would go to your customer care organization and say, okay, what are the 5 or the 3 or the main KPIs, key performance indicators within your customer care organization? Maybe things like, even people answering the phone or a JD Power survey or another survey or whatever that happens to be, and say, if those are your key performance indicators, that means that everybody's being measured against that. I mean, people's their pay, all of that sort of stuff. And if you could go to them and say, I believe that we can improve those key performance indicators by using this technology, then you're going to get their attention really, really quickly. Pat?
Yeah, that's a great point, Bill. I wanted to just highlight something that Tyler mentioned when he answered one of the questions. Hub has a parallel product, which is Sites, which is intended to be internal facing for your organization. So if you're able to identify those KPIs and the things that the customer division cares the most about, it would be fantastic to set up a hub site that was internally facing that would give them access to this kind of information.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to answer a few more questions while we have a little bit of time. One was around the dashboard example that most of the demo was built on, and it was asking if how do we build different data view tabs into the map element? So I guess just to clarify above that, what we looked at for that dashboard example is using Operations Dashboard. That's another configurable app, kind of like Survey123, but in this case, the build dashboards. And you can use dashboards to pull in feeds and be able to look at the data from different angles, whether it's a pie chart, a bar chart, or maps. And in my case, I just configured the dashboard to add multiple different data tabs. And that's really how I added the layers. Behind the scenes, they're actually different maps, but the purpose was to be able to show cycling through the layers in that sense. There's another question, and one point I forgot to clarify. When we were talking about the Living Atlas, I talked about real-time weather services. And although we provide those are actually sourced by organizations we partner with like NOAA, for example. So really, they're the ones giving the weather forecasts and the alerts and whatnot. We're just grabbing that and making it easily available in the maps that, or in the layers that you can bring into your maps.
Thank you, Tyler, for answering those questions and for your questions in general. Before you hop off, we would like it if you would help us fill out this short poll, to continue the conversation. So for this last poll, we won't be sharing the results, but if you could just take a second and let us know if you would like to continue the conversation. Thank you again for joining us today on this webinar. The questions that we didn't have time to get to will be answered offline by our specialists. Again, you can expect an email at the end of next week with a link to the recorded webinar. We hope to see you at GeoConnects at the end of this month. And this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, everyone.